Hi everybody, Dr. Daryl Bostons here with Barrie Chiropractic and Health Services Center. Another video for our reception room Ask the Doctors questions. So here's a good topic. This is something that I've come across a number of times in my career. The question is it okay for me to crack my knuckles? Will cracking my knuckles, or any other part of my body for that matter, cause arthritis? Well, we did a video recently on arthritis, so I'll refer you to that video for information regarding arthritis. But to address the question front and center, there was a study done some years ago, and I'm going to have to try to get that for you, that studied people that that crack their knuckles regularly and people that don't. So I'm going to change the term from crack to manipulate. So I'm not usually a big semantics guy, but on this particular word, I very much am. In this office, we perform things called adjustments. I prefer to call it an adjustment. Some people refer to the process as getting their back cracked or their neck cracked or whatever the case may be. And I know that they don't mean any harm, so no offense taken. But I don't like that term. Jokes are cracked, eggs are cracked. Chiropractors adjust people. And I don't like the word manipulation either. Manipulation, it's kind of got a negative connotation. You're manipulating someone or something. And it implies a lack of precision, where adjustment implies precision. So in my world, an adjustment is defined as a specific amount of force applied at a specific part of the body in a specific direction to attain a specific result. Notice the term specific throughout my definition. The difference between a manipulation and an adjustment is specificity. We're very precise about what we're doing, where, and how much. Anybody can manipulate their knuckles or different parts of their back, but it does take a little bit of knowledge and skill and know-how to perform an adjustment. That said, the question is, what about the people that crack their knuckles in other parts of their body or manipulate that part of their body? So the study that was done studied knuckle crackers, and what they found was that people who manipulate their knuckles are actually less likely to get arthritis of their knuckles than the people that don't. And if you listen to our arthritis video, you'll understand why that is. The long and short of it is that arthritis is not a wear and tear problem. It's a lack of proper use over time, and particularly underuse, so lack of full motion or lack of full function. So if somebody is manipulating movement into their knuckles, they're putting a lot of motion in there and they're doing it frequently. So if what I talked about earlier about arthritis is true, which it is, by the way, then it would make sense that people aren't going to get arthritis in their knuckles. But what does happen if you're not doing it properly is you create a lot of ligament instability and laxity, which can then lead to a whole host of other problems that have to do with instability. So when people are doing this, right, they're stretching this side of the knuckle and they're compressing that side of the knuckle. And they might get that popping noise or that cavitation sound that comes out of the joint when it separates, and you get that release of pressure in there. But they are creating a stretch on one side. So if you do that repetitively, you're gonna create damage to the ligament eventually, and it's a bad thing to do. The same thing can happen to different joints in the body. So it's most common to see people that are neck crackers. They'll grab their head and they'll twist it one way or the other. Drives me crazy. But they'll get relief from that. So the same problem can happen with that happens with the knuckles. So it can lead to ligament instability. But let's talk a little bit about what's actually happening when you're self-manipulating spinal joints. Spinal joints are a lot different than knuckle joints, okay? So I've answered the question about knuckle cracking and whether or not it can cause arthritis. The answer is not likely, but it will cause joint damage. So does it cause damage? Yeah, especially if you do it a lot. Self-manipulations, whether it's the knuckle, the neck, or any other body part, is addictive, and here's why. Okay, so I got my friend here. This is a plastic model of the spine, by the way. I had somebody get very upset with me one day because they thought this was real. It's not, it's plastic. So if you look at the spine, we have vertebrae that are separated by discs. That is a type of joint. If we turn the spine around to the back, on both sides of the spine, we have a different type of joint. Those are called facet joint, F-A-C-E-T, facet joints. And in the neck, we also have another type of facet joint that's in through here. So, complicated. This is my visual fix-it stick, and this is supposed to represent the segments of the spine. So each one of these beads is supposed to represent one of the vertebrae. So in a perfect world, when each joint has a certain amount of function, it has a certain job to perform to contribute to the overall organism. So for example, if I want to bend my spine to make an arch, well, each one of these segments, each one of these joints has to contribute a certain amount of motion in order for the entire arc to be formed, you see? And if you look carefully, the amount of motion of each one of these joints is pretty much symmetrical. So it's a good example of teamwork. Everybody has a job to do, and together everybody does more, right? The red segments represent segments that are stuck together, subluxated, joint restrictions, whatever you want to call it. So if I try to bend this entire stick, you can see that there's a bit of an arch. It's not perfect. It's kind of flat here because these two guys aren't doing their job. And if you look really carefully, the segments adjacent to the areas that aren't moving very well at all have to move more. And this is a good example of what happens in a body system where it's trying to carry on business of normal life. If one segment is not moving very well, another segment is going to have to move more to make up for that. And if one segment's moving more than it should, then another segment somewhere down the line is going to move less to make up for that. And so the story goes on and on and on and on. Now, your spine has a lot of nerves in and around it, of course, that tell your brain what's happening. And it doesn't like it very much if joints aren't moving very well. So the types of receptors are called movement receptors. So if you put your palms together and kind of go like that, you're aware that the entire surface of your palm is being stimulated by movement. If I turn my palm sideways and just move it a little bit, I can tell that certain surfaces of my palm are being stimulated and certain surfaces aren't. So when you have joints that are fixated and not moving, that's kind of what's happening. Certain surfaces aren't being stimulated. It doesn't make the brain very happy, so it starts to kind of crave movement. Now, when we adjust you, a specific adjustment at the problem area, sometimes it'll feel good right away. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. But what happens is we put motion back into that segment, and when that information of movement comes into the spinal cord, it goes up to the brain. But the brain perceives the movement not just from coming from one spot, but rather coming from a larger area. Okay? So it's happy because things are moving again, but it can't necessarily tell that it's from one spot. It perceives it over a larger area. So in this example, where this segment is moving more than this one, a person who self-manipulates, when they twist their head one way or whatever, they get that popping noise out of their spine, they're almost always manipulating the area that's moving too much. So in essence, they're allowing a compensation to compensate more for a problem, which makes the problem worse. The argument, of course, is, yeah, but it feels good. It makes me feel better. I think it's helping me. It's a lie, basically. It's a trick, because when you manipulate that spot, your brain perceives the motion coming from this whole area. So it does give you a little bit of relief, at least for now. But of course, the problem is not fixed, so you feel like you need to do it again and again, and eventually it becomes a habit. The motion creates, it creates neurology that's happy, almost like endorphins and whatnot that you would get from feel-good things. So you crave it more and more and more, and that's how it can kind of become somewhat of an addiction. But I would urge you not to do that because, as I said earlier, you're allowing a problem to compensate more, which makes your problem even worse. If you feel like there's an urge to crack your neck, and that especially if you get relief from it, it usually, almost always means that there's a segment adjacent to that spot that's not moving enough, and it needs to be addressed. Okay, the reason we do these videos is because we're trying to stimulate dialogue and questions. So if you have any questions, please bring it back to us. Very much appreciate you being part of our practice. Talk soon.